Good morning. Happy Wednesday. It's October 4th, 2023. I'm Greg, and welcome to the Daily Bible Wrap-Up. Our readings for today, Psalm 116, 12 through 19. Then we start in Colossians 1 through 23, and Jeremiah 8 through 9:16. So let's just jump right into it. It is a kind of a cloudy, dreary, drizzly day here off the square in downtown Franklin, but looks like the clouds are about to break. Supposed to have a nice day a little bit later today. The leaves are just starting to change. It's a great time of year. I love it when the leaves just start to fall. Not a big winter fan, though, when everything is brown and some more brown and cold. Even in Tennessee, it gets cold. But I digress. We need to go ahead with our readings today. So I'm going to read verse 14 from, I guess this is Psalm 116. I'm going to read verse 14. I will keep my promises to the Lord in the presence of all of his people. Now, of course, we're to keep our promises to the Lord at all times. That's a given. But emphasizing that we will do so when in the presence of his people, I find that interesting because the way I take that is that would encourage others to do the same, something that I think is definitely needed. Now, one interesting aspect of being bolder in my faith in public that I've noticed is the support that I've received from other believers. Like, for example, I was at a conference not too long ago, and a colleague came up to say, hey, I might have mentioned this before, but he came up to say, hey, but he's just like, I appreciate what you're doing with the Bible verses every morning on LinkedIn. And I was like, well, thank you very much. It's, if it's helpful, then that encourages me. I can only be encouraged in that by being bold in the faith. And he was bold in the faith instead of not saying that in public, because he said it in front of a few people in front of my table there. That also encouraged me as well. So it's as if we all want to live in a society where we can freely express our belief in our faith. And of course, on the surface, I mean, that's the law. We have that right to do that. In reality, society has muted Christian speech. And the worst part about that is that we let that happen by being meek and lukewarm Christ followers, limiting maybe our enthusiasm to church or family or close friends. Now we see the result. But the opposite is also true. If we are bold in our faith will be respected. Again, it's not about trying to convert people. It's about just exercising our right to live our faith in the public eye. There should not be any sort of canceling involved for doing so. Colossians chapter 1, verse 1 through 23, we begin, Paul wrote to God's holy people in Colossae. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And probably he wrote this in 60 to 62 AD. Thank you to our friend ChatGPT. I did what I said I was going to do before with the books and with the New Testament, because I was doing it with the Old Testament in the last few books, is before beginning, I was going to consult ChatGPT and just say, give me a summary of Colossians. And very interesting. It might have been actually worth it to read the summary here, but not quite there yet. Anyway, Paul begins by noting that in verse 6, this same good news that came to you is going out all over the world. And think about the time now, too. This is almost 30 years after Jesus was crucified. And the movement is going, and it's gaining a lot of momentum. It's bearing fruit, he continues to say, it is bearing fruit everywhere by changing lives, just as it changed your lives from the day you first heard and understood the truth about God's wonderful grace. Messages don't usually spread that fast, that broadly, unless they're encased in truth. I guess maybe that's not true all the time, but I like to think the fact that this is spreading so much less than 30 years after Jesus was crucified, that it is a testament to the truth of the message. Now, likely Epaphras, not Paul, brought the good news to them, as there's no record of Paul visiting Colossae. That's also from ChatGPT. Paul prays for them, then describes the character of Christ. So, verse 15, Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. Now, having expanded on the truth of faith, he cautions in verse 23, but you must continue to believe this truth and stand firmly in it. Don't drift away from the assurance you received when you heard the good news. Now, we all face crisis of faith. I would assume that's true. I mean, I do. That's sort of like the enemy knocking on the door a little bit. And it's at that point in time that, for me, what I intentionally try to do is that I reach out to God. I'll pray for the Spirit's guidance. I've discussed before my transition from going to beer instead of going to God, and in order to deal with whatever hurt that I would have. But I found that, as you would probably think, going to God, asking the Spirit for guidance, is more effective. I really have experienced that, and much more recently, because I've been more intentional in doing that. It's an interesting cause and effect. The more intentionality that you have here, the more that you see the result. It's not in the mind. It's definitive. If I did this, then this happened. So we're getting back to programming language there. Old Testament, we're still in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 7:30 through 34 is where it's continuing the message of the future fate of Jerusalem. Verse 34, quote, I will put an end to the happy singing and laughter in the streets of Jerusalem. Jeremiah 8 continues, the bones of previous kings and officials of Judah will be spread by the enemy. Quote from verse 2 here, scattered on the ground like manure. Now the people of Jerusalem refused to turn back to God, clinging tightly to their lies. That's in verse 5. Because of this, Jeremiah says, verse 18, quote, my grief is beyond healing, my heart is broken. Remember, Jeremiah is sometimes called the weeping prophet. Jeremiah 19 continues Jeremiah's lament. But then the Lord says, well, I mean, the people just don't know me. This is in verse 3. And he cautions the people not to trust neighbors or family in verse 4. When Jeremiah asks who is wise enough to understand all of this, it's verse 12, the Lord explains it simply in verse 13. You can't get any simpler than this. Listen up. Quote, this has happened because my people have abandoned my instructions. They have refused to obey what I have said. Which is following a common theme that we see, and that's one of the reasons why what I get out of reading the Bible on a regular basis and continuously year in and year out is understanding more and more the holistic messages of the Bible. You get this an awful lot. It's very simple. Obey me and you'll be blessed. And it's not like God's asking for anything bad. He's asking for love. And we see that in families. I mean, isn't that what one spouse asks of another? Of anything else, in a true healthy relationship, all that a spouse asks of the other is love. And that's it for today. I hope you have a wonderfully blessed day and that you walk by the Spirit today. Take care.